Brought to you by BMR.
Hello. I'm making a 2D adventure platformer game. In the last video, I made basic player movement. Now, I want to see what movement would look like with an actual character instead of a square, but since I didn't have an idea of what the main character would look like, I decided to test using a short and tall character. After browsing the assets on itch.io and finding two I liked, I downloaded and extracted them to the project folder to use as the character's sprite. When I first added them to the game, they were really tiny. After a bit of googling, I realized the characters were the correct size, but the objects in the scene were just too big. With the character's size being much smaller than the square I used for prototyping, the current movement speed would be too fast for the characters. So my first task was playing around with numbers until the characters moved how I wanted them to. While doing this, I used a method Meier used during the development of the first civilization. Before release, he noticed that the large size of the map made gameplay very slow during the late stages of the game. His solution was to cut the entire map in half. Without that one decision, Civilization would have been an entirely different game. After about 10 minutes of tweaking values, the character can move around properly without looking like they're flying around all the time. Now I just have to repeat this, but for the smaller character.
A few moments later.
The game now has two functional characters. But I must delete one of them. So I sat down and thought really hard about my decision. After much debate, I have decided to use the long character. In my opinion, a taller character would be more realistic because I have no idea how something so small is going to be able to swing a sword with its hand. RIP short character. Now that we have an idea of what the character is going to look like, it is time to add enemies. AKA, add a red square and make it collide with the ground so it doesn't fall through it. If it feels good as a prototype, it will definitely feel even better with art. After adding the red square to the game, the player needed a way to attack the enemy, and there's no better way to do that than with a sword. In the animation, I noticed that there was a point where the character would swing in one direction, then swing in the opposite direction. This gave me an idea for a combo system, but I'll add normal attacking first so I don't forget. My first attempt at implementing attacking worked, but not the way I wanted it to. The problem had to do with the difference in size between the idle and attacking animations. My first solution to the problem was to change the position of the origin for each animation. It seemed like it was working, but once you face the other direction, it stops working. Solution B, ask Discord. After talking to someone for about 10 minutes, I finally gained knowledge on what to do. Make the size of every sprite the same as the attacking sprites, use an idle sprite as a guide, shift the positions of the other sprites to match, repeat. After doing all of that, it is now time to tweak the collision masks. When that was done, I noticed another problem. Whenever the player pressed a button to move in the opposite direction of where they were currently facing, the player wouldn't flip properly. Luckily, I remembered that the sprite has a center point, and thank God that the character flipped around that point. We can finally move on to the part where the player attacks the enemy. To detect the collision between the sword and enemy, create a point, create a square, snap the square to that point, make the square only detect collision when the player is attacking, get a few bugs, done. The enemy doesn't really do much, so I'll make it move towards the player, but if you try to attack it, there is a small chance that it will dodge. For some reason, the enemy won't dash when it has pathfinding enabled, so I decided to use forces instead. The player can now attack an enemy who has followed the player up to a certain distance and has a chance to dodge when attacked. Thank you for your time. Man's going offline now, goodbye.